the common pitfall. So these are the metrics that you need to evaluate. Now, where do people go wrong? One is obviously not knowing the numbers. When I say not knowing the numbers, it's also about knowing the correct numbers. So we've seen cases where a company would believe that their gross margin is 40%, but you dig in further about how they have arrived at that 40%, they've not factored in some of their expenses. The bookkeeper says that I've not received these bills. When I've given you the data, they've built up an entire financial model on the assumption that they'll maintain 40%. So these are the mistakes. So not knowing the numbers is a key issue. So it's important that we decide on what are the metrics for our business model, what are the key metrics, and then we gather as much data as possible around those metrics. And then we build a financial template, and then we build upon a financial model. The problem here is a lot of times these are guesstimates. You estimate something to be there, but without any concrete evidence, without any concrete data bailing you out about the past. So those are the pitfalls really. So we need to have the numbers, the data, and know what metrics to use. And even after working with these metrics, sometimes what happens is people tend to ignore them. Now, it's not always intentional, but a lot of times they get down to building their products or taking their products to the market. They don't look at these numbers very often. But if you're a startup where things have not stabilized yet, I'm not very sure if things stabilize, you would still be called a startup. But yeah, so it's important that you look at these numbers very frequently. In fact, some of these numbers are on cash position, and these are something to be looked at even if need be on a daily basis. So that is something very important because burn rate changes. So you can't just have a burn rate at the beginning of the year and work on that throughout the year because that keeps changing. So know the numbers and then look at these numbers frequently. Not looking at expenses realistically. To give you an example, for example, CAC, customer acquisition cost. It could so happen that your initial days, some of your early customers are very loyal, and then they are someone who you acquired organically. But it is not possible that you sustain the same thing in future. So it is important that when you're estimating numbers for future, you estimate them realistically. Yes, there could be benefits of scale coming in. Yes, there could be network effect kicking in, and some of these metrics would improve, and that is what we believe, right? The hockey stick approach. But that doesn't happen with all expenses. So it's very important that we look at expenses realistically. For example, when you look at employee cost, a lot of times I see companies making this mistake of taking only the basic salary cost. But typically, if 100 were to be the salary cost, companies end up spending 150 on each of their employees because there are additional costs that comes with recruiting employees. So when you estimate your expenses, it's important to estimate them realistically. Again, scaling too quickly is a common pitfall across the globe. Obviously, VCs want you to deliver magic, but having said that, it's also important that as founders, you really figure out what's the best time to scale up. A lot of times, spending too much money before you even figured out your product market fit is very dangerous. You really haven't reached that stage where the money that you're spending is actually you're able to leverage something out of it and push up your top line. You've not reached that stage. So just because your sales are not well, where the root cause is with the product, without fixing the product, throwing money at the problem doesn't solve it. So just without fixing your product, hiring more sales people will not give you more sales. Without fixing your product, spending more on your marketing and customer acquisition will not give you sales which will continue. So you'll not get enough recurring revenue or consistent revenue in future. So it's also important to know when to scale. So we've seen enough companies where they scale too quickly, they spend too much money. So there's this race where you try to spend as much money as fast as possible because you have this, supposedly you have this assurance from your investors that there's a follow-on run coming up. But that's not the way to look at it because there's also a fiduciary responsibility that you have towards your investor. So determining when to scale up is very key. So first, before you decide to ramp up your operations, ensure that we have that product market fit clearly established. Then again, a common pitfall is about not segregating personal and business finances. In accounts, we use this thing called as separate entity concept. Your business is different, you are different. So the person and the entity are different. But a lot of times we see expenses some of the personal expenses coming in here, and vice versa. We've also seen cases where founders are meeting different people, incurring what would qualify as business expenditure, but that expenditure is not coming onto the books. So it's very important to make this distinction between personal expenditure and business expenditure and keep a track of all business expenditure. When you're spending it for the business, you might as well book in the business and you can claim tax advantage or whatever. But it's important that you book it under business. This other thing which is very critical, which a lot of founders miss out, is ensure that you're booking your salary cost reasonably. A lot of times you undervalue it. So let's say for doing a similar job elsewhere, you would get, let's say, 5 million per annum, right? In INR terms. But then you are undervaluing it, because just because the fit is not there, you're saying, I don't want to take that money. Fair enough, don't take that money. But ensure that when you're estimating your expenses, when you're booking in your costs, ensure that you're booking in a reasonable salary cost event to the founders. So keep your business and personal finances separate. Ensure that you're taking something out for the time that you're spending on in your startup. Now, outsourcing, yes, in the initial days, it's advisable to outsource the non-core activities. But what's important is not to outsource the responsibility. Now, some of the metrics that we've seen enough cases where there is a bookkeeper, but essentially what a bookkeeper does is a bookkeeper categorizes the expenses and gives you a statement saying, boss, this is what you have spent, this is what is your financial position, and this is how your profitability is. A lot of times you don't focus enough. So essentially what's happening here is you're not just outsourcing the bookkeeping element of it, but you're also outsourcing the responsibility to it. But a bookkeeper is not going to come and tell you, boss, you're burning too much. The bookkeeper tells you how much you're burning. Now, assessing whether you're burning too much, assessing what's the runway left, what's the right time to start looking for funding, that is the founder's responsibility. So that is not the bookkeeper's responsibility. So as founder, it is important to be hands-on with these metrics. So when you outsource, don't outsource the responsibility part of it. Outsource the work, but not the decision-making and the responsibility part of that. Not timing your fundraise. Again, you cut it to thin, where you're out of cash in a few days or a few months, and that's when you're looking for fundraise. That's not a good position to be. You virtually don't have any bargaining chips. So whatever deal is thrown at you, you are supposed to accept that. On the contrary, you're spending your money wisely, and your default LI, where you also have a path to profitability, and then you have a higher bargaining chips with you when you're sitting across the table structuring a deal. So it's also important to time your fundraise. Empower professionals, especially consultants, legal consultants, your finance consultants. Empower them to a point where they'll give you advice and you're ready to listen to them. It's not about, I'm managing this company, so I'm saying this has to be done, this has to be done this way. No, it is important that you give them enough power and freedom to come up with their suggestions, and you take in those suggestions. Yes, you know the business more than anyone else. But having said that, there are certain aspects of business which you'll have to be absolutely careful of. And then have this thing saying, sales are vanity, profits are vanity, but cash is reality. Accrual basis of accounting, revenue, gross net, all of that is fine. But at the end of the day, what matters is your cash realization. So count it only when it hits your bank account. So those cash realizations are important. It's good that you need to follow an accrual basis of revenue recognition. You need to keep a tab of what your bookings are, what your sales funnel is, what are your pipeline, what your leads pipeline is. All of that is fine. But it's important that you realize them. You convert them into cash as soon as possible. So cash is the only thing. So these are some of the common pitfalls.